Hello grade 12s. Today we are going to continue with differential calculus. Now let's check the statement that we are given today. We are given that the function f of x is equals to 2x cubed plus px squared plus qx plus 3 is drawn below. Now we have a point n, 2 and negative 9, meaning that 2 is my x coordinate and negative 9 is my corresponding y coordinate, and m are turning points of f. As you can see on our graph here, m and n are the turning points. Now let's carry on with the statement. It further says that g is the y-intercept of our function f. Yes, remember something. For y-intercept, what do we mean by y-intercept? Meaning that the x value is always equals to what? Is always equals to 0. And they say that a, b, and c are the x-intercept. For the x-intercept, you know that y is always equals to what? 0. Now let's check the first statement that we are given today. The first question, they say to us, show that p is equals to -5 and q is equals to -4. Now let's use what we are given in my statement. Remember, we have a point 2 and -9. The x coordinate is 2 and the y coordinate is -9, meaning that they substituted 2 in my original function where they see x and got -9. What we are going to do, we are going to reverse the process. Remember that my function is given by what? F of x is equals to what? 2x cubed plus px squared plus qx plus what? Plus 3. We said that our y value is what? Is -9, meaning that I'm going to say what? -9 is equals to what? How did they get this -9? They substituted 2 where they see x. This is going to be 2 multiplied by 2 cubed plus p multiplied by 2 squared plus q multiplied by 2 plus what? Plus 3. This is going to be equals to what? We are going to say -9 is equals to what? Is equals to 2 cubed is 8. 8 multiplied by 2 is 16, meaning we have 16 here. And then here we have what? P multiplied by 2 squared, which is what? Which is plus 4p. And then here I have what? Q multiplied by 2, which is 2q plus 3. Remember that I'm going to check for the like terms, meaning that I have -9, 16, and 3. What is 16 plus 3? 16 plus 3 is 19. Transpose positive 19 to this other side. This is going to be -9 minus 19 is equals to what? 4p plus what? Plus 2q. What is -9 minus 19 is -28. Is equals to what? 4p plus what? Plus 2q. We can say that this is equation number 1, equation number 1. Let's check how many values do we need to solve. We need to solve 2 values. In other words, I need to find 2 equations so that I can solve simultaneously. Now remember something again. They said what? They said n is my turning point. Remember, how do you get the turning points? You derive your function, you equate to 0, you get the xtp. What do we mean by the xtp? We mean the x coordinate of the what? Of the turning point. Remember again, my function is what? F of x is equals to 2x cubed plus what? Px squared plus qx plus what? Plus 3. We said that in order for us to get these 2, which is the xtp, remember my f of x is equals to 2x cubed plus px squared plus qx plus 3. Now, what we said is that n is our turning point, meaning that in order for them to get the 2, which is the x coordinate of the turning point, remember they did the first derivative and equated to 0 and solve for x. We are going to reverse the process. What I need to do is that I need to find my what? My first derivative, which is f prime of x. This is going to be equals to what? Remember the rule of deriving. We said exponent multiplied by coefficient, exponent minus 1. This is going to be what? 3 multiplied by 2 is what? Is 6. X to the power of 3 minus 1 is what? Is 2. Plus 2 multiplied by p is what? Is 2p. X to the power of 2 minus 1 is what? Is 1. And then here we say what? 1 multiplied by q is what? Is q. X to the power of 1 minus 1, which will be x to the power of 0. Any number to the power of 0 is equals to 1. And then we know that we don't derive the what? The constant is always equals to 0. But remember, I'm going to equate this to what? To 0, because when we were finding this what? This 2, we equated to 0. Meaning that where I see x, I must substitute what? 2. This is going to be 6 multiplied by what? 2 squared plus 2p multiplied by 2 plus q is equals to what? Is equals to 0. What is 2 squared? 2 squared is 4. 6 multiplied by 4 is 24. Meaning that I have 24 plus what? 2 multiplied by 2 is what? Is 4. 4 multiplied by p is what? Is 4p plus q is equals to what? Is equals to 0. And then I can say that this is equation number 2. Now, here is our 2 equations for us to solve our 2 values. Now let's check something. For equation 2, sorry for that, we can make q subject of the formula, or if you want, you can make what? P subject of the formula. Now, but the simplest one is to make what? Is to make q subject of the formula, so that we can substitute what? Q where we see what? Q here in equation number 1. Now let's check. Let's just say that we are making what? From 2. We are making equation 3. Remember, equation 3 is that q is going to be the subject of the formula, meaning that I have q is equals to what? 24 transposed to this other side is going to be minus 24. 4p transposed to this other side is going to be minus 4p. And then this is equation number 3. And then you can say sub equation number 3 into equation number 1. In other words, where you see what? Where you see q, you substitute minus 24 minus 4p. Now let's go back there. Remember, this will be minus 28 is equals to 4p plus what? 2. But we said q is equals to what? Minus 24 minus 4p. It means I have minus 24 minus 4p. This is going to be equals to minus 28 is equals to 4p. We know 2 multiplied by negative 24 is minus 48. And then we have what? 2 multiplied by negative 4p is minus 8p. And then this equation tells me that there are no means only p, meaning I need to solve for p, of which the goal is to make p subject of the what? Of the formula. In other words, I have minus 28 is equals to 4p minus 8p is minus 4p minus 48. This is going to be equals to, I'm going to transpose minus 4p to this other side. I will be left with what? 4p is equals to, and transpose minus 28 to this other side. This is going to be 28 minus 48. Then 4p is equals to, what is 28 minus 48 is minus 20. I will divide by 4 both sides in order to solve for p. In other words, my p is equals to negative 20 divided by 4 is minus what? Minus 5. And then I need to go and find the value of what? Of q. The value of q, remember, depends on the value of what? Of p by equation number 3. But we already found the value of what? Of p, which is minus 5. In other words, I'm going to my equation 3 and substitute negative 5 where I see p, in order for me to solve the value of what? Of q. This is going to be q is equals to minus 24 minus 4 multiplied by what? By minus 5. Then this is q is equals to minus 24. What is negative 4 multiplied by negative 5 is positive what? Positive 20. In other words, the value of q is equals to minus 24 plus 20, which is equals to minus 4. Yes, my friend, I have shown that the value of p is equals to what? Minus 5, and the value of q is equals to what? Minus 4. Now let's go to the next question. Now let's check the second question. It says determine the coordinates of G, the y-intercept. We have 2 options of finding the coordinates of G. Option number 1, you go straight to your function and then you write the constant. Remember, the constant is always the y-intercept. What is the constant in this case? Is 3. But we know that the x-coordinate of this 3 is 0 because we are dealing with the what? Y-intercept. In other words, the coordinate of G will be what? 0 and 3. Now let's go to option number 2. Option number 2, you can calculate the coordinates of G. Remember, we have calculated the value of P and the value of what? The value of Q. We know that P was minus 5 and Q was minus 4. In other words, I'm going back to my function and substitute my two values. Now let's check. My function is given by f of x is equals to what? 2x cubed. What is the value of P? The value of P is minus 5. In other words, I'm going to have minus 5x what? Squared. What is the value of Q? The value of Q is minus 4. I'm going to have minus 4x plus what? Plus 3. Remember when we are dealing with the what? Y-intercept, we let x to be equals to what? To be equals to 0. Meaning I'm going to have y is equals to what? 2 multiplied by 0 cubed minus 5 multiplied by 0 squared minus 4 multiplied by 0 plus what? Plus 3. In other words, y is equals to what? 3. But remember, we need to write this in a coordinate form. In other words, the coordinate of G, remember when we let x to be equals to what? 0. In other words, I'm going to have 0 and what? And 3. Now let's go to the third question. Now let's check the third question. It is given that the coordinates of C are 3 and 0. Calculate the distance between what? A and B, the x-intercepts. Remember something, C is one of our x-intercepts, meaning that in order for me to calculate the distance between A and B, I must calculate the coordinates of what? Of A and B, giving the coordinates of what? Of C. Now let's check something. Remember our function f of x is given by what? 2x cubed minus what? 5x squared minus 4x plus what? Plus 3. Meaning that I need to what? I need to find the values of what? A and B. Now let's check something. Remember this function can be written as what? F of x is equals to x minus what? Minus 3 multiplied by ax squared plus bx plus what? Plus c. Now let's check what we did here. Remember that if I multiply these two brackets, they must give me a cubic function. Why did I write x minus 3? Because x minus 3, because 3 is one of our what? Is one of our x-intercept. Remember when you were solving for the x-intercept, you let y is equals to what? You let y is equals to 0. This was going to be what? This was going to be x minus 3 is equals to 0, or ax squared plus bx plus c is equals to what? Is equals to 0. And then here you got what? X is equals to 3. But as we are going to reverse the what? The process. Hence we write x minus 3 multiplied by a parabola, because we know that when we multiply these two brackets, they must give me this cubic function. Now let's check something. I need to find the values of what? The values of A, B, and what? And C. How do I find the values of A, B, and C? Now, remember that if I multiply x and ax squared, it must give me ax cubed. This must be equals to the component that contains x cubed. This is going to be equals to 2x cubed. And then I'm going to divide by x cubed both sides to solve for the value of what? Of A. Remember, this is going to be x cubed divided by x cubed. And then I have what? A is equals to what? A is equals to 2.
1, go.
Now, let's go to calculating the C, which is the what? Constant. Meaning I need to find all the components that will be associated with what? With the constant. Here I can see that negative 3 multiplied by 6 is going to be what? Negative 3c is equals to the constant in my function, which is what? 3. In other words, for me to get the value of C, I need to divide by negative 3 both sides, because what you do on the left hand side, you also do it on the right hand side. This is going to be negative 1. Now we need to calculate what? We need to calculate the value of what? The value of B. Now remember something, x multiplied by bx is what? Is bx squared. And then we know that negative 3 multiplied by what? By ax squared. But what is my a? My a was 2, meaning this is going to be negative 3 multiplied by 2x squared, which will be what? Minus 6x squared. This must be equals to the component associated with what? With x squared, which will be what? Minus 5x squared. In other words, here I will have what? If I divide both sides by x squared, I will have b minus 6 is equals to minus 5. Meaning the value of b is equals to what? minus 5 plus 6. This is b is equals to 1, positive 1. I have calculated the value of a, c, and b, meaning that my whole cubic function is given by what? Is given by f of x is equals to x minus 3. What is the value of a? The value of a is 2. In other words, I have 2x squared. What is the value of b? The value of b is 1. I have plus what? X squared. What is the value of c? The value of c is negative 1. This will be, this will be x minus what? Minus 1. So for that, now check something. When you multiply these two brackets, they must give you what? This function. You can check that on your own. Now we are calculating the what? The x-intercept. Remember, we need to let what? We need to let y is equals to 0, meaning that this is going to be 0 is equals to what? X minus 3, 2x squared plus what? Plus x minus 1. And then I'm going to open how many brackets? I have x minus 3. I'm going to open 2 brackets for this one. This is going to be, remember these two first terms, when you multiply them, they must give you what? This 2x squared, meaning it is going to be 2x and x. And then these last two terms, when you multiply them, they must give you what? They must give you minus 1. But when you add or minus them, they must give you a middle term. This is going to be what? 1 and 1. Now let's check something. We know that the middle sign is positive, meaning that here I can have what? I can have positive and minus in order to get what? Positive x. This is going to be what? Equals to 0. And then we say x minus 3 is equals to 0, or what? 2x minus 1 is equals to 0, or x plus 1 is equals to 0. Then this is going to be what? X is equals to what? 3. And then here we have what? 2x is equals to 1. It means x is equals to 1 over 2. Here we have what? X is equals to minus 1. Now let's check something. For x is equals to 3, remember these are going to be the coordinates of what? Of c. We have what? 3 and 0. For x is equals to 1 over 2, we can see that these are going to be the coordinates of what? Of b, meaning here I have what? 1 over 2 and 0. For x is equals to negative 1, these are going to be the coordinates of a, because a is in the what? Is in the second quadrant, and we know here all the x values are negative. In other words, here I will have what? I will have a is what? Is negative 1 and 0, meaning that in order for me to calculate the distance between what? B and A, you can use your distance formula and substitute your coordinates, but here we are going to what? We are going to say 1 over 2 minus 1. When what you can do as a grade 12 learner, you need to follow the right procedure. You can use your distance formula, the one with square root of what? X1 minus x2 all squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. But here we are just going to make things simple. In other words, the distance AB is equals to 1 over 2 minus 1. This is going to be equals to 1 over 2 plus 1, which is what? Which is 1 comma 5. This is equals to 3 over what? Over 2. Now let's go to the fourth question. So the fourth question is that calculate the x coordinate of what? Of M, a turning point of F. Remember, M is one of our turning points, meaning I need to calculate the x coordinate. They didn't say determine the coordinates of M. Calculate the x coordinate, meaning the only focus is to calculate what? The x coordinate of M. Now remember, my f of x, sorry for that, my f of x is given by what? Is given by 2x cubed minus 5x squared minus 4x plus what? Plus 3. How do we calculate the coordinates? We derive and equate to 0 and solve for the xtp, which is the x coordinate of the what? Of the turning point. In other words, the first derivative here will be what? Will be 3 multiplied by 2, which is 6x squared, 2 multiplied by negative 5, which is minus 10x, 1 multiplied by negative 4, which is minus 4, x to the power of 0 is equals to what? 1. And then remember, we said we are going to take our first derivative and equate to what? And equate to 0 and solve for what? For x. I can see that I can divide by 2 both sides, meaning that if I divide by 2 both sides, I will do what we call sharing is carry, meaning here I have what? 6x squared divided by 2 minus 10x divided by 2 minus 4 divided by 2 is equals to what is 0 divided by 2 is always equals to 0, meaning that 6 divided by 2 is what? 6 divided by 2 is 3, meaning I'm going to be left with what? 3x squared. Negative 10 divided by 2 is what? Minus 5x. Negative 4 divided by 2 is what? Minus 2, which is equals to what? Which is equals to 0, meaning that I'm going to open 2 brackets. In other words, I will have what? I will have, remember these 2 first terms, when I multiply them, they must give me the first term. In other words, this is going to be 3x and x, because 3x multiplied by x is 3x squared. In other words, the last 2 terms, when I multiply them, they must give me negative 2. But now, remember, you need to take into consideration we have what? Minus 5x in the middle term. In other words, we know that 2 has only 2 factors, which is what? 1 and 2. In other words, here I'm going to say I have what? I have 2 and what? And 1. But the bigger factor takes the sign of the middle term. Sorry for that. This is supposed to be what you can do as a grade 12 learner. You can see that this is a parabola. You can substitute your values into a quadratic formula to solve for the x values. But here we can have what? We can have 2 and what? And 1. Remember, now let's check the sign of the middle term is minus 5x. And remember that the bigger factor takes the sign of the middle term. What is the bigger factor in this case between 1 and 2 is 2, meaning 2 is going to be minus, 1 is going to be positive. In other words, I will have what? 3x plus 1 is equals to 0, or x minus 2 is equals to what? Is equals to 0. In other words, here 3x is equals to minus 1. What is x? X will be minus 1 over 3. Here x is equals to what? Is equals to 2. We can see that, remember, we have 2 turning points, which is m and n. In other words, this x is equals to 2 is going to be the x coordinate of what? Of n. And then this x is equals to minus 1 over 3 is going to be the x coordinate of what? Of m, because m is in the what? Is in the side whereby the x values are negative. Now let's go to the last question.
Go.
Now let's check the last question. Determine the x coordinate of h, the point of inflection of f. They only want the x coordinate, not the coordinate of h. Now, remember, when you're talking about the point of inflection, this is whereby the graph changes its concavity. Now, let's check something. We need to find the what? The second derivative. Remember, my function f of x is given by 2x cubed plus px squared plus what? Plus qx plus 3. But we have calculated the values of what? Of p and q. This is going to be 2x cubed. What is p? Minus 5x squared minus 4x plus what? Plus 3. Now, we must do the first derivative and the second derivative. After doing the second derivative, we must equate to 0 and solve for the x value. In other words, whenever they are talking about the point of inflection, meaning you must know that you must always find the what? The second derivative. Now the first derivative will be f prime of x, which is equals to what? 6x squared minus 10x minus 4. Then the second derivative, f double prime of x will be what? Will be 2 multiplied by 6, which is 12. X, 1 multiplied by negative 10, which is minus 10. Remember, we said we must equate to what? We must equate to 0, meaning I will have 12x minus 10 is equals to what? 0. This is going to be 12x is equals to 10, meaning I need to divide by 12 both sides. In other words, this is going to be x is equals to what? What is 10 divided by 12? I think this is 5 over 6. Here's the x coordinate of h. Thank you very much for today's lessons.